So, thank you everyone. So indeed, this is going to be a general talk, so you can hear, even if you're not an Android developer. Just to introduce myself, my name is Xavier Gouchet. I'm a French developer, so excuse my horrible accent. I've been working in Android since 2009, and I'm currently the lead Android engineer in Workwell. And you can find me on every social network you can think of with the same handle. Quick note about Workwell. This is a company that makes an application that tries to keep in the same application every services that you can have around your workplace. So parking lot, cantina, nursery, concierge, everything you can think of is going to be in there with a bit of a social layer added to it. So anyway, a brief introduction before I would dive into the good stuff. The first thing to know is why I wanted to do this talk. About a year ago, we had the opportunity to work with a company whose main product is selling tobacco, cigarettes. And we hesitated a lot because we weren't sure if we wanted our name associated with a company that makes money out of giving cancer to people. And so eventually we didn't do it. But this brought the first though that maybe having a business and being technical didn't mean you couldn't also think about what your work had as an impact on the rest of the world. Another source of questions is this survey by Stack Overflow in 2018. Where a couple of questions were about ethics. One of the questions was that if we ask developer to write code for an unethical purpose, would they do it? And 60% said no. Just unethical code, no. No, of course not. But the rest of them would say either yes or depends on what it is. Which means that for the 40% of developers answering the survey, they could actually say, yeah, I would write some unethical purpose code. And this is, I'm very interested in this and saying, okay, the word unethical in itself has some very bad meaning, usually. So what would be the reasons behind that? And the other question was that, do developers have an obligation to consider the ethical implication of their code? On which most people say yes. So the question is, how many of you have already taken a thought on the ethical implication of what you're writing? Yeah, good. So a bit spoiler alert on what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to be mostly asking questions and not necessarily answering them because, well, as you'll see, ethics is mainly subjective. I will give a few pointers and a few tips and tricks to try to, give my own thoughts on it, but you should always take it and take what I say with a grain of salt. So first, what does ethical mean? Ethics is the moral principles that govern a person's behavior or the conduct of an activity. So in here, the most important part is moral. So what's moral? Moral, it's the principle, basically it's the idea of there is something right and something wrong and being able to make the difference between right and wrong. So these are the basic principles we're going to start from. And there is one more concept that I want to talk about, which is extra-legal. If you take a look at something that's legal, it's something that, yeah, it's written in the law, you are allowed to do it. If you take something illegal, you're not allowed to do it. It's written in the law, you can't do it. Something extra-legal, it's not written in the law yet, because no one ever thought about it. Right? If you take all the GDPR law, 20 years ago, no one would have expected to write something about it because it wasn't a concern. So something that's extra-legal could become illegal in a few years because someone abused it. So, as I said, ethics and morals are subjective. So for the first time, as developers, the answer is not going to be true or false. And I mean, it's the same in every interactions. There is no pure black or pure white. Everything is like just 50 shades of, yeah, well, let's not go there. So first of all, let's just talk about how you can be ethical with your users. The first thing is, excuse my French, give a fuck about what your users are thinking. This means that a good thought experiment is that if your users were in the room when you are in a meeting and taking decisions and talking about them, would they be happy about it? Would you make the same choices? Would you talk the same way about them? Also, one thing to ask yourself is, are your users also your clients? Because, for instance, when you're in B2B, sometimes the one who is paying you is not the one who is using your app. And so there is a difference. You need to appeal to both of them. Also, App Store and Play Store reviews. We all have, given a certain amount of users, store reviews, and both platforms allow you to reply to those and send an answer when the user sends you feedback. How many replies have you written to users? Because the reviews can hide something, and sometimes these are actual real reviews that I have had on my app. Like someone decided to give me 1 star and saying best. Yes, thank you. And someone just added 5 stars and said, oh no, the UI doesn't scroll smoothly. And you're like, okay, but you still like the app, or you don't, or I don't know. So, and I know I'm thinking that I wrote very few replies to users, because I don't have time to do that. But sometimes it's really interesting, to take into account what they're trying to say to you in their own way, and reaching out to them. A quick tip about talking about your users, and this resonates a lot with what Rob was saying earlier today, is that if you call them users, you're going to lose the idea that they are actual people. So a tip to go around that is to give a name to them, right? Instead of just saying users or clients or customers, you can create fake identities that you can relate to, right? So you can use, your favorite first names and say, okay, we have Alice, which is a free user, and we have Bob, which is a casual user, he paid once or twice, and we have Charlie, which is a premium user, and he has a subscription on the application, and start, constructing their personality and how they interact with your application and your product. And that way, when you start talking about a specific use case or a specific scenario, you can say, imagine that Bob is trying to do this inside the application, and everyone knows what you're talking about. And if Alice, Bob, and Charlie don't appeal to you, you can always use your favorite work of fiction as a source. Just to give a quick example, this is one of the sample environment that we have in our own work, where we have tenants and real estate companies. So we have this kind of thing ourselves. Also, when talking about your users, think about who is going to be impacted by the code you're going to write, because you're going to impact your users because hopefully they're going to use your application. But you're going to also impact people around them, the family, the friends, the colleagues. So how will these people are going to be impacted directly or indirectly? If you're working with social networks, like you have login with Facebook, Twitter, whatever, maybe there are going to be some impact on their social network and their online presence. Because we all know this application that when you log with Facebook, is going to automatically post some things on your wall. Or they're going to gain access to your contacts, or they're going to gain access to all this information. So try to think about what your application, through that, can have as an impact. Also, what about the device? Right? We're all working with mobile devices. What if your application drains the user's batteries or the data plan? This is something that you need to think about. Or what just if you're doing too much computing, and the whole system slows down, and it makes all the application unusable. One thing, this is a quote I found a few months back, is that the computers and the phones are getting, more powerful every year, and yet every web page, every application is struggling to have a smooth interaction, right? If you've used Gmail recently, even on a recent laptop, it struggles. I mean, they're Google, they know the best practices. But there is nowadays kind of a culture of we need to ship features at whatever cost. And sometimes, I mean, there is this motto that says you should not optimize too early, which is true. But sometimes what people hear is just you should not optimize, full stop. So this is wrong, because most of the users are not going to have the latest MacBook or the latest iPhone or the latest Pixel. They're going to have a phone that is 3 or 4 years old. Like Rob said earlier, you have this scale of people from the most tech-savvy to someone who's living in a cavern. And the same thing goes with the devices. You're going to have people with the latest phone and the latest updates and using the beta version of the OS. And you're going to have someone who is still struggling with a cupcake phone. Also, when you're delivering feature, usually you have the product owners who are going to decide what you should do. But you're not just someone who needs to type code. You can think, and you can think for your users and talk on their behalf. And so you can say, is the UI or the UX relevant? Again, this resonates a lot with what Rob was saying about accessibility. But if you ask around anyone using a dedicated piece of software, and especially people working in a trade, so in specific niche, is the UI UX sensible for them? I've had this conversation half a dozen times already with different people around me, among others with my car mechanic. And he's using a car mechanic dedicated software to manage his stock, to manage all the car parts, and to do the invoices, the billing, and all of that. So it's all a single software. And it's a niche. There is only one software that does that. And whenever he has to use it, is just insulting his machine because it's not working the way he thinks it should do. And when I talk with him about this, he's saying, but no car mechanic would ever think of using it that way. And this is an issue because basically, when you're writing a software, you should put yourself in the shoes of the one where you're going to be using it. So you should not design a software for developers or for designers, but you design it for the one who are going to be using it. So yeah, like Rob said, is the UI and UX accessible? Because you need to think about all the people who are going to have permanent or temporary accessibility issues. Also, you need to ask questions. Does the feature make sense? Does it make sense in this context? Does it make sense in your whole product? Is the design appropriate? These are questions that you should ask, and you should always ask questions when you're asked to do something. So then you should be also ethical with your code. First question is to ship or not to ship. You can say, yeah, well, we're going to ship every day and have the minimal viable products, and who cares if there are bugs, we're going to fix them later. Or you could be perfectionist and say, okay, we're not shipping unless we're 100% sure there is not a single bug, and you're going to spend 5 months trying to make sure and never ship. So I don't have the answer. It's up to you to find it, of course. But the same thing goes with maintaining your application. Which bugs should you fix, and which one should you fix first? Should you fix the bug that is impacting one paying user, but that makes it impossible for them to use the application? Or should you fix a glitch that's happening on 1,000 users on Samsung, but just makes the title in the toolbar a little bit uglier? This is for you to decide and prioritize. Which OS version to support? We all have, especially in Android, this question of which minimum SDK level should I use? And there are tools to try to see this, but the question is not as simple as it is, because depending on who you're going to targeting, you're going to have this statistics skewed toward the more high-end OS versions or the oldest ones. Also, should you keep maintaining your old versions just for 5% of your user base, or 1%, or 0.5%? This is a question you need to ask yourself. One quick tip when you're talking about the code base is to take ownership of it. It's kind of like the Scout ground camp rule. That is, you should leave the ground camp in a better way, cleaner than you found it. It's the same thing with your code base. Whenever you're looking at the code base and you see an issue in someone else's code, you should make it your responsibility to fix it. Because when you're in a team, when you're in a company, you all have the same goal, which is to make the best project possible. And so if you're looking at something, you're looking at a file and you see a bug, and you can say, it's someone else's job. It's their file, they did it, so they should fix it. But the thing is, you're already inside the class. You already spotted the bug. And if you spotted it, chances are you already know how to fix it. So why not fix it too? Otherwise, if you don't do it, it's just like someone walking in the forest and seeing a plastic bottle left by someone on the ground and taking a picture on Instagram and saying, oh, some people, and just going about their day. If you're there, just pick it up. Do not trust your instincts. Well, yes and no. You can trust your instincts, but you should know that your instincts can be wrong. This chart is a really, really interesting chart about cognitive biases. A cognitive bias is basically all the shortcuts and mistakes that your brain is making when taking a decision or making a judgment. And every single line on the circle is a different cognitive bias. So it's basically, for example, a cognitive bias is the hammer bias, where basically if your only tool is a hammer, everything starts looking like a nail, which simply means that based on your experience, if you're used to something, you're going to always see the things from the same point of view, which doesn't mean that you're seeing the ground truth. Another cognitive bias is the bandwagon effect, which means that if you're in a room and 3 people already say that something is a good idea, even if part of you think it's not a good idea, you're going to say, yeah, it's a good idea. So there are lots of them, and we all have them. And we'll all make mistakes in judgments and mistakes in decision. So this is something that you should know. And so not rushing with your instincts can help you take a step back and say, oh, am I falling into a mistake because of a cognitive bias or not? This is something that you should know. Another thing in regarding to taking a pause and taking a step back is that sometimes, you're rushing. You really need to deliver this feature because the app should have been released yesterday. So you're rushing and writing code. And the problem is when you do that, you stop thinking about why you're doing this or what's the impact. You're just rushing on the actual problem you're trying to solve. And this quote from Jurassic Park is exactly the thing. You should stop and think, should I actually do that? Now, a few sample of things gone wrong. There is this issue I've seen on Twitter. Basically, a woman who downloaded a coloring application for her son, and the son, by mistake, activated a subscription in the application to get new drawings to paint, and so the subscription is like $50 a week for a coloring application. And the problem is she uninstalled the application, but it didn't cancel the subscription. And a few months later, she realized that she had spent hundreds of dollars on an application that she wasn't using anymore. So at some point, there is a mistake that has been done, but maybe someone knew about this and say, oh, actually, this is a way to get more money. So you should learn to say no. As a developer, when you're asked to do something and you know that it's not good, it's unethical or immoral, you should say no. Not so long ago, a friend of mine who was working on a bank website got a feature request from one of the product owners. It was around the time of GDPR, and so he was about to implement, the usual disclaimer text that says, oh yeah, we care about your privacy, yada yada. And he was asked to add a little checkbox to say, yes, I understand this, and I agree to keep using the website. And I agreed to acquire a new insurance subscription for 10 euros a month. And basically, they were trying to use GDPR to actually make people subscribe to a new insurance plan. And lots of people, because we've all had hundreds of emails saying, yeah, we have a new privacy policy and whatever, no one's going to read that. But you still have to write it, right? So he simply said no. And he left the company and said, no, I will not write this. And eventually, because he said so, this feature never got written. Because sometimes people say, yeah, but if I say no, someone else will do it. Probably, maybe, but if you don't say no, no one will think about if they should do it in the first place. Saying no is the first step toward discussing why this is an issue. And sometimes you think something that you're going to be asked to do is unethical because you only see it from your own point of view, cognitive biases. But as saying no, I think this is unethical because of this reason, the other person can say, oh, actually, this is not what it's about, and they can explain why it's not unethical. Or they can realize that, oh, it is unethical, I didn't think about, and thanks for telling me. So you should have a right to say no, because you're not just people paid to write Kotlin or Swift. You're people paid to participate in a project. Another thing that's interesting is anticipating misuse. Because the code you're going to be writing, it's not just going to sit inside a repository, right? It's going to be used inside an application, or if it's a library, it's going to be used by other developers. How can it be misused? How can it be hacked? Most of the time, if the code you're writing is just to display, a GIF, an animated GIF, not much misuse. But there are still things that can go wrong. For instance, who here has a tape over the webcam on the laptop? Yep. Even Mark Zuckerberg does. The Apple web camera, one of the first Apple web camera, had a physical shutter. That is, basically, to turn on the camera, you had to switch the shutter on. So you couldn't turn the camera on without opening the shutter. Nowadays, we had a period of whenever the camera is shooting, you have an LED that says, oh, actually I'm recording. Problem is, it's very easy to actually disable the LED. So you can still run the camera without having the LED, which is why most of us are paranoid and putting a tape over the camera. But this is one thing that Apple did really well, saying, yeah, no, we're going to have a physical shutter, so whenever you whenever you switch on the webcam, the shutter is going to slide. About being ethical, maybe some of you heard about it. Microsoft have a contract with the US military to use the HOLOLENS to hardware to train soldiers. And so the HOLOLENS is kind of a VR headset. And basically, following the contract, when it got public, you have hundreds of Microsoft employees who started to sign petitions to say, no, do not do this. We are not working in Microsoft to help people get killed. So you have to say something. Whenever you see it, you have to say something and raise your voice to say, actually, this is not a good idea. Unfortunately, Microsoft didn't care about it and is still doing this, but they lost a few developers who just resigned after hearing they would do it. Deep learning, harmless, right? Very, very nice technology. You can do a lot of things. Last year, here in Code Mobile, I think it was last year, we had a very, very nice talk about how it helped some people in the village to know when the crop would get a disease before it would be visible with a human eye. So it can help you solve a lot of problems. But it can do a lot of things worse. This is something that's called deep fake. And basically, it's using the possibility. So this thing, it's called thispersondoesnotexist.com. It's a website. Whenever you land on it, you have an AI that generates a picture of someone that does not exist. So there is no one that looks like that on Earth, because it's an entire. It's a picture that's been generated by a neural network, and it's just amazing what we can do with it. But deepfake is a technology that lets you film an actor and then take the face of someone famous and put it, of someone famous or someone else, and put it and replace the head in a video. So for instance, you can have, for men, usually it's political men that gets you get video of them saying funny or hateful speeches. So you could have Obama saying hateful thing, or Trump, yeah, whatever. And for women, it's worse because usually it's used to make pornographic videos. So it's the same technology, and you could have amazing things done with it, but you can also have it do a harmful thing. There is this book, I'm currently reading it. I mean, I read it, I read this part yesterday, so I had it to the slides, but there is this accident theory that when you invent a new technology, you're also inventing the accident of that technology. So for instance, the day you invent a car, then you are inventing the car crash, because without a car you can have a car crash. Whenever you invent a plane, you are inventing a plane crash, etc., etc. And there is one of the characters in this book that says he knows that there is this accident theory. And he is trying to invent something, but he is not going to turn it on before he finds what's going to be the accident and how he can prevent it. So this is something that you can keep in the back of your mind, and when you're starting to work on something really, really new or advanced, and you say, okay, actually, what's going to be the accident of this technology I'm working on? How many of you are using open source libraries inside your applications? How many of you read the license of the open source library? Yeah. So do you know what this license gives you as rights and as duties? The problem with open source is that nowadays we only think as, yeah, it's open source, so I can use the code. No, it's not just that. Open source means the code is readable. But if you want to use it, sometimes you have duties regarding to it. Sometimes it's going to mean that whatever you build with it must be open source. So you should at least read the open source licenses of the libraries you're using. Fortunately, most libraries are using standard licenses, so it's quite interesting. So it's easy to know, okay, they're using the Apache license or the MIT license, so I know what it means. But sometimes they are using their own obscure license, and you need to read it and understand it. And of course, it takes time, but you need to do it because maybe one day they're going to come and say, oh, you're using my library, and now you must make your old product open source. On the same thought, intellectual property. Do you create the third-party libraries inside your application? Nowadays in Android there is a plugin that automatically do that based on your Gradle dependencies, so it's fairly easy to do. But do you create also the code snippets that you copied and pasted from Stack Overflow? Right? Do you create the authors of the content inside your application? Do you make money off of them? If you're using a temporary image, because you're writing your feature and you need an image as a placeholder, so you're going to go to Google Image and find the first icon that kind of match what you do. And time passes and you don't get the definitive icon, so the app ships with this icon that you got from Google Image. Do you credit it? Do you have the right to use it? Nowadays in Google, in Google search, you can say, oh, I only want Creative Commons images. So you can use this filter, but does anyone use it, really? So these were a lot of thoughts. We're going to have a few slides on ethics and deontology to focus. I'm not a philosophy professor, so I won't bore you to death with a lot of details, but just to give a few pointers, there are two trains of thoughts that you can think of. The first one is utilitarianism by Bentham, which basically is the idea that when you make a decision, you should choose the decision that will profit the most people, which is the one which will have the better effect on the most people. So it means that you could actually do a bad action, but if it profits people. For instance, say you want to kill Hitler, right? Well, of course, it's killing someone, but in the same action, you're going to save lots of lives. And on the other hand, you have Kant's school will, which basically means that actions have a moral impact on their own. So you should not kill anyone for any reason. And these are, two ends of a spectrum, and you have lots of different philosophers who thought about that. So lots of things to read. We don't have the time for that, but very, very interesting. Also, do you need to wait for lawmakers to deal with the issue? As I said in the introduction, lots of things are extra-legal until they have become illegal, right? Problem with lawmakers is that most of them are not tech-savvy. If you watch the hearing of Mark Zuckerberg by the American Congress, the questions they ask are really, really ridiculous. It's amazing that they don't even know what they're talking about. And so waiting for them to make the laws, you're going to wait a long time. This is why you should actually take this matter at hand and be the voice of your users or of the code that you want to write. Fortunately, there have been a few people who worked on these questions before me, and I mean, they're more capable than me to do that. The first one is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, written in '48 by the United Nations. How many of you have read it? Do it. It's really, really interesting. It has a lot of interesting things written in '48, and it has, among other things, this, Article 12, that no one shall be subjected to arbitrary interference with their privacy. And this was just in '48. So this still resonates today. We are all having issues with privacy and stuff like that. And in '48, this was already set in this document. Another thing is that everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. So this is still something that was done half a century ago, more than that. More recent, you have the Software Engineering Code of Ethics and Professional Practice. It's been written in 1997 by two American associations, the IECS and the ACM, which are developers and engineer association. Because it's something written by developers, it has a version. So nowadays it's version 5.2, written in 1999. Basically, this is a code of conduct for professional software engineer. Like many trades have, they have their own code of conduct. This is one that's been written. And again, it's a really interesting read. So if you have, some time, just go and read it. It's quite quick. And it has, among other things, this part: software engineers shall act consistently with the public interest. This is the first point in this document, that you should act with the public interest in mind. And so you should accept the full responsibility for what you're working on. So What this means is that you shouldn't say, yeah, but I was told to do it. Yeah, but you still did it, so you still have responsibility of your actions. You should also be fair and avoid deception. And here it says in the statement in software and related documents, so it means that you should not try to trick the user into doing something, like hiding checkboxes, right? We all hate that. Another thing is that you should maintain the integrity and independence in your professional judgment. So you still have your own judgment and you have your own mind to make decisions. And you should always make decisions to keep supporting and maintaining human values. Then there is the Programmer's Oath, which is a document created by Bob Martin, Uncle Bob, which is a TDD and clean architecture enthusiast. He wrote it in 2015, and it's basically an equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath. So the Hippocratic Oath, it's the oath that doctors need to take before they can practice medicine. And this oath is stating most of the same things, but basically it's a promise that to the best of your ability and judgment, you won't produce harmful code and you always produce your best work and never stop learning and improving your craft. For the last part, you're all good because you're here. But there is more to it than that. And one of the key points is to the best of your ability and judgment, which means that it's still, if you can and if you think about it, you should do the best you can. So I'm going to reach the conclusion. To keep an ethical mindset, a few pointers. The first one that I really like is primum non nocere, which is Latin for first, do no harm. So whatever you do, the first thing is do no harm. It's like, it's like the 3 laws of robotics. A robot shall not harm a human. It's the first law. Well, it's kind of the same thing. As a developer, you won't harm your users. 3 laws of developers should do that. You should not take anything for granted, right? We all have cognitive biases. So you should always doubt of everything, including yourself. You should think before you code anything. Take a step back. Think about what you're asked to do, and not just when you're given a task, just open up your editor and write something and commit. Just think about what you're doing. Take ownership. Take ownership of the code base. Take ownership of your product, because you're part of a team and you're responsible for what it does. To go further, here I have a few pointers. One of it is really interesting. It's called Dark Buttons. So it's a website and a Twitter account. What they do is basically showing all the dark patterns that emerge from applications and websites. One of my experience a few weeks ago, I landed on a website which had, the annoying pop-up that say, hey, we want to give you notifications. So as usual, because it's the first time I go on the website, I don't know what it is. I said, no, I don't want notifications. And the thing is, when you say, no, I don't want notifications, the website, the page refreshes, and it shows an image that says, hey, if you want to read our content, allow notifications. You say, no, it refreshes. If you want to see our content, allow notifications. I close the tab. There is a very, very interesting talk by Yang-Tin Cheng about responsibly smashing Pandora's box, which is, it has some overlap with my talk, but you should really look into it. There are a few attempts at making an open source ethical license. So there is just the Just World license and the No Harm license. You can look at it. It's actually very complicated to implement. We can talk about that later. But yeah, these are attempts, and it's quite a good read. You can just look at cognitive biases on Wikipedia. There is a list of hundreds of biases, so you can go through there and look into it. It's really interesting to know how the human mind works, or sometimes it doesn't work. And finally, if you have time, just read the last 3 documents I talked about, which are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the Software Engineer Code of Ethics, and the Programmer's Oath. It wouldn't take too long to read them, but it's very, very interesting to read. So I thank you very much for your attention, and if you have any question, please raise your voice.